Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. What you are about to hear is based on a chilling event that allegedly took place in an old HDB block in Kallang Riverside, Singapore. A woman came home to a terrifying sight. Her domestic helper, Lorna, standing on the very edge of the balcony railing, moving stiffly, as if guided by invisible strings. The moment the employer grabbed her, the heavy balcony door slammed shut on its own, locking them outside. We're going to break down what really happened that night. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. The first week was a blur of cardboard boxes, sweat, and the satisfying ache of manual labour. Moving day in Singapore is a humid, sticky affair, and the lift at Block D was slow, stopping at what felt like every floor. But by Sunday evening, the flat at Unit 12A7 Kallang Riverside had begun to resemble a home. Evelyn stood in the middle of the living room, a lukewarm can of 100+ in her hand, and allowed herself a small, tight smile of victory. Marcus was on the balcony, wrestling with the new Wi-Fi router, his voice a low murmur of technical curses. "It's the space," Evelyn said, mostly to herself. I'd forgotten what space felt. Their old 2-bedroom flat in Bishan had been a shoebox. Every night was a ballet of sharp elbows and sidestepping, of stacking school bags on top of rice cookers. Here, the rooms felt vast. The sea breeze, just as the agent promised, was not a myth. It swept through the open windows, carrying the faint, briny smell of the coast and the distant hum of the ECP expressway. It was a sound of life, of movement. Lorna, their helper, had already claimed the kitchen. She was a pragmatic woman from Iloilo, and she humming a Visayan tune as she scrubbed down the counters, exorcising the ghosts of the previous tenants with bleach and determination. The children, 9-year-old Chloe and 5-year-old Ryan, had discovered the true gift of the flat, the long, unbroken HDB corridor outside. They tore up and down it on their scooters, their wheels a loud clack, clack, clack on the concrete, their shrieks echoing in the stairwell. This was their simple purpose. 2 working parents, 2 kids, 1 helper. The goal wasn't luxury, it was functional, affordable family life. Evelyn worked in marketing for a logistics firm in the CBD. Marcus was an IT systems analyst for a local bank. Their lives were a spreadsheet of mortgage payments, school fees, and grocery bills. This flat, 35% below market value, was the single greatest financial win they had ever had. It was the breathing room they desperately needed. The agent's words about the unit next door, 12A8, felt like a story from another world. On the 3rd day, Evelyn stepped out to throw the rubbish at the central chute. The door to 12A8 was right next to it. It was a standard issue brown metal door, identical to hers. A faded, peeling sticker from a long-forgotten pest control company was stuck crookedly near the handle. A red plastic bag, snagged on the corner of the metal gate, fluttered limply in the breeze. The previous tenant passed away, alone. Evelyn looked at it for a full 10 seconds. She felt nothing, no chill, no sense of dread, just a vague, administrative curiosity. She wondered who managed the utilities, if the town council cut the grass. It was just a door, an empty property, a non-factor. She tossed the rubbish bag down the chute, the clang of the metal flap startling a stray cat on the landing below. She went back inside, the thought evaporating before her key even turned in the lock. The new routine set in with the speed of a tropical sunrise. At 6:15 a.m., Evelyn's phone alarm would sound. The humid darkness would still be pressed against the windows. The first sounds were the whir of the fan, the distant rumble of the day's first MRT train, and Marcus's heavy sigh as he hit the snooze button. This was the rush, the normal, relatable environment of a working family. "Lorna, is Ryan's uniform ready?" Evelyn would call out, her voice muffled as she pulled a blouse over her head. "Marcus, you're on coffee duty." "Mummy, I can't find my water bottle." "Already packed, Sayang," Lorna's voice would sing out from the kitchen, soon followed by the smell of toast and Milo. By 7:20 a.m., The flat would be a chaotic storm of backpacks, hair tying, and misplaced keys. Evelyn and Marcus would herd the children out the door, pressing the lift button repeatedly as if it would make it come faster. They'd part ways at the void deck, the kids and Lorna walking to the bus stop for the school shuttle, Evelyn and Marcus joining the river of office attire flowing towards the Kallang MRT station. The commute was a shared, silent ritual, pressed shoulder to shoulder with strangers. They would scroll through their phones, Marcus checking server statuses, Evelyn reviewing her first meeting agenda. Their conversation was the functional shorthand of a couple who had been together for 12 years. Remember to pay the SP bill. My boss is driving me nuts. Did you see Chloe's math score? We need to talk about tuition. Their work was demanding. Evelyn sat in glass-walled meeting rooms, arguing over freight percentages and marketing budgets. Marcus spent his days in the Arctic chill of a server room, staring at lines of code. Their flat was the destination, the sanctuary they worked for. While they were gone, the flat had its own life. Lorna was the master of this daytime domain. She would hang the laundry on the bamboo poles, a colourful flag of children's t-shirts and office wear flapping high above the ground. She'd go down to the small NTUC fair-price supermarket at the base of the next block, exchanging pleasantries with the uncles and aunties at the coffee shop. The flat was quiet then. The only sounds were the whir of the washing machine and the tinny dialogue from the Filipino drama she watched on her tablet while she ironed. She too registered the unit next door, 12A8. Unlike Evelyn, Lorna was superstitious. Back in her barangay, a story like that, a person dying alone, meant the spirit was stuck. But here, in this clean, bright, concrete world of Singapore, her superstitions felt silly. The neighbour on the other side, 12A6, was far more annoying. They were a young couple who practiced the violin at 11 p.m. The silence from 12A8, by contrast, was a blessing, a good neighbour. She thought, the evenings were the best part. Evelyn and Marcus would walk home just after 7 p.m., the heat of the day finally breaking. As they stepped out of the lift on the 12th floor, the corridor would be alive. The air was thick with the competing, delicious smells of neighbouring dinners, garlic and chilli from one unit, the rich aroma of curry from another. They would open their door to the sound of their own lives. Ryan would be watching cartoons. Chloe would be complaining about her homework. Lorna would be setting the table. Dinner, she'd call. They would eat together, the 6 o'clock news playing on the television, the conversation tumbling over itself. Ryan would talk about a caterpillar he found. Chloe would complain about her social studies project. Marcus would detail a near-catastrophic server crash. It was mundane. It was normal. It was perfect. After the kids were in bed, Evelyn and Marcus would finally sit on their new IKEA sofa. The balcony doors were open, and the sea breeze was cool. This was the right move, Marcus said, putting his feet up on the coffee table. Told you, Evelyn replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. And the neighbours? What neighbours? Evelyn laughed. The violinists in 12A6 are a bit much, but 12A8 is a dream. So quiet. The rumour, the agent's awkward smile, the story of the person who died. It was all just noise. It was the fine print you skipped. The reality was this: a good flat, a great view, and the quiet, comforting thrum of their family's life. Later that night, Evelyn woke up to get a glass of water. The flat was dark and silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. She padded barefoot across the cool tile floor. As she passed the front door, she heard a sound from the corridor. Scrape. She paused, listening. It was the sound of the metal gate. Not hers, the other one, the one next door. Scrape. Rattle. She stood still, her heart suddenly loud in her ears. Then she heard a low meow. Evelyn peered through the peephole. The stray cat she had seen earlier was rubbing its body against the gate of 12A8, scratching at the red plastic bag that was still snagged there. She let out a breath, a small, nervous laugh escaping her. A cat, of course. She got her water and went back to bed, climbing in next to Marcus's warm, sleeping form. She was asleep again in minutes. It was just a building. It was just a flat. It was just home. The 12th floor corridor was a tunnel of cold, recycled air. Evelyn fumbled with the new key to 12A7, the brass feeling icy against her palm. The building itself was old, a concrete monolith from the late 70s, and this floor felt particularly forgotten. The granite tiles were worn smooth, their speckled pattern filmed with a faint, gritty dust. Above, the rectangular fluorescent lights buzzed and stuttered, casting a weak, throbbing blue-white glare that fought with the shadows. With every powerful gust of wind from the nearby river, the lights would flicker, and the entire hallway seemed to lurch in and out of existence. Her unit, 12A7, was at the far end, just before the stairwell exit. Next to it sat 12A8. Even on her first viewing, the unit had felt wrong. It wasn't just empty, it felt sealed. A heavy, rusted padlock was clamped over a thick hasp that had been bolted directly into the doorframe. The metal door itself was painted a sickly, peeling beige, and the unit's mailbox was a gaping mouth stuffed with a solid brick of yellowed flyers, takeaway menus, and damp warped free circulars. It was a monument to years of postal neglect. At the base of the door sat a small greenish doormat, the fibres compressed and rotting. On it, barely legible, were the faded letters, "Welcome." Evelyn made a face. It was an eyesore. She'd have to complain to the building management. Clearly, the owner had either defaulted or lived overseas, leaving the unit to rot. The stuffed mailbox was just lazy postal workers. The rusted lock was a sign of a long-running legal dispute. Probably. It was ugly, but it was just bricks and mortar. She was here for the low rent and the river view from her own balcony, not to worry about her neighbour's housekeeping. The lock wasn't just for security. It was too heavy, too permanent. It looked less like it was meant to keep people out, and more like it was meant to keep something in. The stuffed mailbox wasn't just neglect. It was a physical record of time passing, of no one coming or going, while the welcome mat mocked the very concept of entry. This is the first test of denial. The mind sees a problem, an abandoned, ugly apartment, and files it under administrative, not existential. The visual dissonance of the lock and the mat is a paradox, a clear sign that welcome is the one thing this place is not. Later that afternoon, while waiting for the elevator, Evelyn saw an elderly neighbour watering a dense collection of orchids hanging from a bamboo rack in the corridor. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace. "Xin Chao," Evelyn tried, offering a small wave. "I just moved into 12A7. The old man, Mr. Tan, paused, his small watering can hovering. He nodded, his eyes crinkling, but the smile didn't quite reach them. "Ah, the new one. I was just wondering," she said, gesturing with her thumb toward the rusted door. "Is that unit vacant? It looks like it's been empty for a long time." The effect of her question was immediate. Mr. Tan's hand visibly tensed on the watering can. He stopped watering. He didn't just hesitate. He seemed to deflate, the warmth vanishing from his expression. He looked from her to the door, and then back again, with an expression she couldn't place. It was almost pity. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, though the corridor was empty. "Old woman died in there, Madame Ong." He motioned back to his own door, 12A9. "We were neighbours for 20 years. Quiet, kept to herself." He sighed, a thin, papery sound. "She had a stroke. Nobody found her for a week." Evelyn felt a cold jolt. "Oh my God, that's horrible." A week. She did the math, imagining the heat, the humidity. She felt sick. But surely they cleaned it. "Oh, yes," Mr. Tan said, finally resuming his watering, his focus now entirely on a purple orchid. "The family came, the monks came, the cleaning crews came. They bleached everything, but," he shook his head, "nobody stays. Anyone who moves into that flat, they never stay long. 6 months, 3 months, one time, only 2 weeks. He wouldn't look at her. They call it the silent house. The silent house, Evelyn repeated. Why? Because it's empty. No, he said, his voice flat. Because it's not. He finished with his orchids and nodded a final, curt goodbye, shuffling back into his apartment, leaving Evelyn alone with his words. She stood there for a moment, the hum of the lights suddenly seeming louder. It was just a sad story, she told herself, a tragic, disgusting story, but a story. People don't stay long was just superstition feeding on itself. They'd hear the story, spook themselves, and leave. She was different. She was practical. Mr. Tan's change in demeanour was the warning. He wasn't sharing gossip. He was delivering a eulogy for her tenancy. He has seen this exact scene play out before. His refusal to meet her eye. His retreat into the mundane task of watering his plants. It was the action of a man who knows nothing he says will change the outcome. He didn't just tell her a fact. He passed on the building's oral history, its curse. He has done his neighbourly duty by planting the seed of fear. The rest is up to the house. That night, the apartment felt different. Her cat, Kopi, a normally bold Siamese, seemed to agree. Kopi refused to go near the shared wall between 12A7 and 12A8. He sat in the exact centre of the living room, a perfect triangle from all 3 walls, and just stared. His blue eyes were fixed on one spot, about midway up the plaster. His tail, usually a calm question mark, was rigid and twitching. "What's up, buddy?" Evelyn clicked her tongue. "There's nothing there. See?" She walked over and tapped the wall. It was solid, newly painted. "Probably a gecko, huh?" Kopi didn't react, didn't even blink. "Fine, be weird." She figured it was the new environment. Maybe he smelled Mr. Tan's cat, or residue from the paint. Animals were territorial and strange. He'd get used to it. This is the primal warning. An animal has no capacity for superstition. It doesn't know the story of Madame Ong. Its senses are simply reporting a threat. Kopi isn't smelling paint. He is sensing a presence that is human, blinded by logic and fatigue. Cannot. The wall is not just a wall. The animal instinct is the first line of defense, and it has already been breached. Kopi has become a living barometer, and the pressure is dropping fast. He is the canary in the coal mine, and he's already suffocating. At 2:17 a.m., she woke up. It wasn't a loud noise that had woken her. It was a new one. Ting, ting, a-ling. A thin, metallic sound. Wind chimes. It was faint, but clear, cutting through the low hum of the air conditioner. Ting, ting. Evelyn sat up, her heart suddenly pounding. The sound was close, too close. It wasn't coming from outside her window. It sounded like it was coming from the corridor, or from next door. Impossible. Mr. Tan's words echoed. No power. Empty. It had to be the wind. The river wind was strong, as she'd noticed. It must be carrying the sound from someone else's balcony, maybe from a lower floor. It was an acoustic quirk of the building. She was just spooked from the old man's story. She lay back down, pulling the blanket up, forcing her eyes shut. It's just the wind. There is no wind in a sealed, empty apartment. There is no power. There is no tenant to hang a chime. This is the first impossible event, the first direct violation of physics. The wind isn't moving the chimes. Something else is. Rationalization is a fortress the mind builds to protect itself. But the sound has found a crack. It's an announcement, a polite, almost musical knock on the shared wall, reminding her, "I am here. I am still here." She couldn't sleep. The dripping sound of her kitchen tap, which she'd meant to fix, seemed to pound in her ears. Drip, drip, drip. Finally, she got up for a glass of water. As she passed the front door, she paused. Kopi was sitting by the door, staring up at the peephole, driven by a new, cold anxiety. Evelyn put her eye to the lens. The distorted, fisheye view of the corridor was empty, just the flickering blue light, the worn tiles, and the dead-bolted door of 12A8. She was about to turn away when a movement caught her eye. A shadow. It was standing by the balcony wall at the far end of the hall, but it wasn't a person. It was just a shape, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette, as if a person had been stretched vertically. It had no features. It was just a column of absolute black, darker than the shadows it was born from. She watched, frozen, as the shadow moved. It didn't walk. It glided, detaching itself from the balcony wall and drifting silently across the corridor until it stood directly in front of 12A8. It paused, as if considering the door. Then, it didn't open the door. It sank into it, merging with the peeling beige paint like ink into water, and was gone. Evelyn stumbled back from the door, her hand clamped over her mouth. No. She shut her eyes, breathing hard. No, no, no. It was the light, the flickering. The dying fluorescent bulbs were creating a strobe effect. It was an afterimage, a hypnagogic hallucination from being half asleep. It was the old, warped lens of the peephole playing tricks on her. It had to be. This was not an illusion. This was an entity. It didn't cast a shadow. It was the shadow. Its movement was unnatural, and its destination was confirmed. 12A8. It has a key. She has now seen the impossible. She has borne witness. Denial is no longer a shield. It's a desperate, failing strategy. The silent house has just shown her its tenant, and the welcome mat at its door suddenly feels like a trap. It began as an irritation, a flaw in an otherwise perfect apartment. At 2:10 a.m., Evelyn woke for no reason. Her body jolted from a deep sleep by some primal, silent alarm. She lay still, listening to the hum of the city 12 floors below, the whir of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Silence. She was about to close her eyes, dismissing it as a neurological hiccup, when the sound came, a soft, dragging sound. It was heavy, muffled, and unambiguously wrong. It was the sound of furniture scraping tile, but slower, more deliberate. Skrrr. A long, gritty pull, followed by a soft thud. Then, silence again. The sound was coming from the other side of the wall, the one she shared with 12A8. She held her breath. The building was old, but the walls were thick. She'd never heard so much as a cough from her neighbor. This was different. It was loud, yet secretive. Thud. She slipped out of bed, her feet silent on the cool hardwood, and pressed her ear against the textured wallpaper of the shared wall. It was cold against her skin. For a full minute, there was nothing but the faint, structural groan of the building. She was about to pull away, convinced she had dreamed it, when it came again. This time, it was not a drag but a tap, a sharp, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. Right against the other side of the plaster, a jolt of adrenaline shot through her. It was too precise to be an accident. It was a signal. She recoiled from the wall, her heart hammering. She backed out of her bedroom and stepped into the hallway of her own apartment. The small corridor was still. The digital clock on the oven read 2:17 a.m. She unlocked her front door and peered through the peephole. The main building corridor was empty, awash in the weak, flickering buzz of the overnight fluorescent lights, a perfect, sterile silence. She locked the door, bolted it, and leaned against it. By morning, the fear had congealed into rational annoyance. She told Marcus over coffee, expecting him to share her irritation. He chuckled, not unkindly, as he scanned the morning news on his tablet. "It's an old building, Ev," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Probably rats. Big ones, or just the wind howling through the ventilation shafts. This place is a wind tunnel." It wasn't rats, Mark. It was furniture. Someone was moving a dresser, and then they tapped. He looked up, a small frown of concern replacing his smile. "At 2 a.m., it's probably just jet lag from the previous tenant in 12A8, or maybe they work a night shift. Don't worry about it. Get some earplugs. She wanted to believe him. She needed to. But his dismissal felt hollow. A paper-thin explanation laid over something deep and dark. He hadn't heard the deliberate quality of it. He hadn't felt the cold of the wall. The next night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her muscles tense. 2:00 a.m. Past 2:05 a.m. Nothing. She began to relax, berating herself. Marcus was right. It was a one-off. Wind, rats. Then, at 2:10 a.m., precisely, it started. Skrrr. Thud. It was the exact same sound, the same cadence. The repetition was, in itself, a form of escalation. This wasn't random. This was a schedule. The dragging sound was followed by the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. And then, something new. A whisper. It was low, sibilant, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was too muffled to be intelligible, a mere texture of a voice. But it was undeniably human. Or, at least, it was vocal. The sound prickled the skin on her arms. She strained to hear, pressing her ear to the wall again. The whispering was constant, a dry, sandy language she couldn't place. It didn't sound European or Asian. It didn't sound like any human intonation she knew. It was guttural, full of clicking, sibilant sounds. The sounds came back every night for the rest of the week, always between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m. Always the same sequence. The drag, the tap, the whispers. The intensity grew. The dragging became a scrape, as if something with sharp edges was being pulled. The tapping became more frantic. A rapid tap, 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 tap. Impatient and angry. The whispers grew in volume, a chorus of dry voices, all speaking at once. She stopped sleeping. She would lie in bed, rigid, waiting for the clock to hit 2:10 and the performance to begin. During the day, she was a ghost, exhausted and irritable. Marcus's concern shifted from the noise to her. You look terrible. Evelyn, you're letting this get to you. It's just a noisy neighbour. I'll leave a note on their door. No, she said, too quickly. Don't. I'll handle it. She didn't know why she said it. Only that the idea of confronting the source of the sound, of it becoming real and acknowledged, terrified her more than the sound itself. Then, the event happened that shattered the barrier between hearing and seeing, between their world and hers. One night, after the sounds had faded at their usual 3:00 mark, she finally drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep. When she woke, sunlight was streaming into the room, but it was wrong. The light was too bright, too direct. She sat up. The heavy, blackout curtains she clipped tightly shut every single night were open, not wide open, but parted by a gap of 3 or 4 inches. Right in the middle, a cold dread, far deeper than the nightly fear, settled into her stomach. She knew, with an unshakable, bone-deep certainty, that she had closed them. She was meticulous about it. It was the last thing she did before getting into bed. She checked the clips. They were still fastened to the fabric, but they had been slid apart. The gap was just wide enough for someone to peek through. She stumbled out of bed and went to the window, her hands shaking. She looked down. 12 floors of sheer brickwork. No fire escape, no ledge. The window itself was locked from the inside, the deadbolt firmly in place. Nothing could have gotten in. She remembered a story Marcus had told her, a piece of local superstition he'd laughed off when they moved in. He'd pointed to the small Sims mirrored charms hanging on some of the neighbours' doors. They believe windows and curtains are doors in their own right, he'd explained. Boundaries that spirits use to watch the living. They have to be sealed properly at night. It wasn't a joke anymore. She was being watched. That night, she told Marcus about the curtain. This, she thought, was the proof. This was physical. This, he couldn't dismiss. He listened patiently, his face a mask of practiced calm. "A draft. Evelyn," he said softly, as if speaking to a frightened child. "You must have left the kitchen window ajar, a cross breeze. It would have been just enough to suck the curtains apart. I didn't. Mark! I check every lock, every window, every night. You know I do." "You think you do," he said, his voice laced with a gentle, suffocating rationality. "But you're exhausted. You're not sleeping. You're forgetting things. Honestly, Ev, I'm getting worried about you. Maybe you should talk to someone. This stress, it's manifesting." That was when the true isolation began. It wasn't just that he didn't believe her. It was that he thought she was the problem. The fear was hers alone, a cold, smooth stone she held in her gut. She stopped talking about it. She had to find a rational answer. The next day, she went down to the concierge. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, forcing a bright, casual smile. "I was just wondering if you knew when the tenants in 12A8 moved in. They've been making a bit of noise at night, and I wanted to leave them a welcome basket." The concierge, a prim woman in a grey blazer, tapped at her computer. She frowned. 12A8? That's impossible. Dear, impossible. That apartment is empty. It has been for 6 months. The owner is in Singapore. We have it on our vacant list for weekly maintenance checks. No one has been in or out of that unit. Evelyn's smile froze. "Are you sure? I hear them every night." The woman's eyes softened with pity, a look Evelyn was beginning to despise. "The pipes in this building make a dreadful racket. Dear, it echoes. You're probably hearing the plumbing from the penthouse." An empty room. The sounds were coming from an empty room. That night, Evelyn did not get into bed. She sat in the armchair in her bedroom, a heavy glass paperweight in her lap, her eyes fixed on the shared wall. She watched the clock. 1:00 a.m. 1:30 a.m. The silence of the apartment was absolute. 2:09 a.m. She held her breath. 2:10 a.m. It began. Skrrr. The sound was louder tonight, angrier, the scrape of something heavy and splintered. Thud. The whispers started immediately, a frantic, hissing chorus. Tap, 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 tap. The tapping was no longer just a tap. It was a pounding, a fist, or something harder, striking the plaster. The wall vibrated. Evelyn stayed in her chair, paralyzed, her knuckles white on the paperweight. The pounding stopped, replaced by a new sound, a slow, deliberate scratching. It was not the sound of a rat. It was methodical. It started near the ceiling and dragged all the way down to the floor, right behind her bed. It was the sound of a fingernail, impossibly long and hard, or perhaps a piece of metal, carving a line in the plaster. The scratching stopped. The whispers ceased. The room was plunged back into silence, but it wasn't over. From the wall, from the very spot the scratching had ended, a voice spoke. It wasn't a whisper, and it wasn't muffled. It was a dry, clear, guttural voice, as if its owner had pressed its mouth against an electrical socket, speaking directly into her room. And this time, she understood the word. It was not in that strange, sibilant language. It was in perfect, unaccented English. Open. The word open shattered her denial. It was no longer a noise. It was a demand, and it was directed at her. The rationalizations fell away, leaving only a cold, primal fear. That same night, she was woken by a different sound, the creak of the sliding balcony door. She found Lorna, their helper, standing on the very edge of the balcony railing, her arms out, moving stiffly as if guided by invisible strings. Evelyn screamed. The moment she grabbed Lorna's arm, yanking her back, the heavy glass door slammed shut on its own with a deafening bang, locking them both outside on the narrow balcony. The event, lasting only a minute but matching the terrified story from the intro, was the final proof. It terrified Marcus out of his pragmatism. He finally believed her. Shaken, they knew they couldn't stay, but they couldn't just run. They needed help. Their desperate search led them to a name whispered on forums, Madame Perung. For 3 days, the apartment had been a sanctuary, sealed by Madame Perung's potent ritual. The Peranakan healer, a woman built of stern efficiency in her purple kabaya, had arrived before dawn, her batik bag clinking with glass and metal. She had paced the apartment, her silver-bund head held high, sniffing the air. "No one died in your unit," she had declared, her voice a firm rasp. But next door, a silent death. Evelyn had shuddered, the memory of the faint, sweet-sour smell that had clung to the hallway for weeks last autumn suddenly clicking into place. "She's lonely," Madame Peng had continued, unpacking pandan leaves and a vial of scented water. "Spirits like that, they cling to women who stay home. They see a life they lost, and they want to be part of it." The healer's work was thorough. She burned the pandan, the fragrant smoke a stark contrast to the cloying perfume Evelyn had sometimes smelled in her own kitchen. She poured the scented water in a precise line across the balcony threshold, a barrier against the unseen. She sealed the path between Evelyn's unit and the neighbouring one with 4 black candles, their flames burning unnervingly still. "Do not open your curtains for 3 days, she warned, her eyes sharp. Then, as a final measure, she hung a string of dark, heavy wooden beads on the front door handle. They looked like oversized prayer beads, polished to a dull sheen. "This is Kayu Raja," she'd said. "King's wood. It holds the line. If it changes colour, call me." For 3 nights, the silence was a blessing. The scraping sounds from the kitchen stopped. The feeling of being watched while she watered her plants on the balcony vanished. The soft, inquisitive tapping on the shared wall of her bedroom ceased. Evelyn slept, but on the 4th night, she woke at 3:00 a.m., her heart a cold stone in her chest. The silence was back, but it was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a held breath, of something waiting. She padded to the front door. In the dim, orange light of the corridor, she saw it. One bead, forth from the top, had turned a sickly, pale grey. It looked like dead wood, like ash. Evelyn had called Madame Peng, her fingers trembling so badly she dropped the phone twice. The healer's voice on the line, usually so robust, was tight with a new tension. "The wood is dead," she'd whispered. "It didn't just block her. She fed on it. She's stronger than I thought. She doesn't just want to be near you, child. She wants to be in. I cannot help you. This requires a different path." The referral led to Venerable Boon Keat. He arrived not with the practical clatter of Madame Peng, but with a profound, absorbing quiet. He was a small man in saffron robes, his scalp shining under the apartment lights. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply stood in the entryway, his eyes closed, and listened. "She is very sad," he said at last, his voice a calm, rhythmic whisper, like sand pouring. He walked to the string of beads and touched the grey one. "She has been invited." "What? No, I didn't," Evelyn stammered. "You are here, you are home, for her. That is an invitation." He asked for nothing but a cushion on the floor, facing the shared wall. He did not burn pandan. He lit a single thick stick of sandalwood incense. He did not use scented water. He placed a small brass singing bowl by his side, and he began to chant. It was not a song. It was a low, guttural vibration that seemed to come from the floor itself. The sound filled the room, pressing against Evelyn's ears, sinking into her bones. The sandalwood smoke grew thick, not rising to the ceiling, but coiling on the floor, clinging to her ankles like mist. Evelyn sat on the sofa, her knees drawn up, and watched as the monk's ritual took hold. The air grew heavy, static. The formula was backstory of the ghost event, revealed by witness, document, ritual. The monk was the witness, the ritual was the document, and Evelyn was about to be the audience. The chanting deepened. The room's light seemed to dim, the corners filling with shadows. The smoke was no longer sandalwood, it smelled of stale tea and dust. Evelyn blinked, and the monk was gone. She was standing in her own living room, but it was wrong. It was her apartment, but mirrored. No, it was the apartment next door. #0704. She had never been inside, but she knew it. It was a perfect reflection of her own layout. A small but grey-haired woman sat in a rattan chair, staring at the wall. Evelyn could see her, but she couldn't see Evelyn. The woman, Mrs. Teo, was sipping tea. The radio played a tinny, old-fashioned tune. She looked at the wall, Evelyn's wall, with an expression of profound, aching envy. The vision shifted, accelerated. Evelyn saw a montage of loneliness. Mrs. Teo watering a single, dying plant. Mrs. Teo looking at framed photos of children in Australia, in Canada, children who never called. Mrs. Teo listening to the sounds of Evelyn's life through the concrete, the murmur of the television, the occasional bubble of laughter when Evelyn had a friend over, the sound of the shower. Then, the fall. It was so simple. A misstep on the way to the kitchen, a crack as her hip struck the tiled floor. She didn't cry out. She just lay there, her eyes wide with surprise. Then fear. She was alive. For days. The vision forced Evelyn to watch. Mrs. Teo's hand, reaching for the phone on a low table, her fingers just inches short. The radio clicked off. The tea grew cold. The first day, she whispered for help. The second day, she tried to tap on the wall. Tap, tap, tap. Evelyn felt a scream rise in her own throat. That was the sound she'd heard for weeks. It wasn't a ghost. It was a dying woman. The vision showed the third day, the silence, the resignation, and then the anger, a deep, cold fury at the injustice, at the silence, at the neighbour next door who was home, always home, but who never heard. Her death was not a peaceful drift. It was a petrification, a hardening of loneliness into a singular, desperate will. I will not be alone. I will not be silent. The vision snapped. Evelyn was back on her sofa, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The sandalwood smoke was gone, replaced by the sharp tang of ozone. Venerable Boone Keat was silent, his eyes on the wall. All earlier clues now make sense. The tapping, Evelyn whispered, her voice hoarse. She was knocking for help. In life, the monk agreed, his voice still calm. And in death, she continued. She does not know she is dead. She only knows she is here, and you are there. The smell in my kitchen, sometimes like floral perfume. She wore jasmine oil, the monk said. She was trying to make her presence known, to be a guest in your home. And my curtains. Evelyn choked, the memory horrifying. Madame Peng said not to open them. I always felt like someone was watching me from my balcony, not from outside, looking in. She envied your view. She envied your life. She stayed on her own balcony, watching you on yours. Now, she sees no difference between the two. The bead, Evelyn said, pointing to the door. It turned grey. Madame Peng's Kayu Raja is strong wood, said the monk. It is meant to repel, but this spirit is not an attacker. It is a parasite of loneliness. It does not fight, it clings. It drained the life from the wood, just as it wishes to drain the life from this home and replace it with her own. The monk rose, the ritual seemingly complete. He walked the apartment, placing small yellow paper talismans above each doorway. He lit 3 sticks of incense and planted them in her potted ficus. Then he returned to the shared wall, the place where Mrs. Teo had died. Knocking, he took from his robe a tiny octagonal mirror. It was no bigger than her thumb. This will stop her, Evelyn asked, desperate. This is not a shield, he said. He pressed the tiny mirror face down against the plaster. It is an anchor. She is a reflection lost between worlds. This will give her a place to rest. He stepped back, his work done. The apartment felt still, but not peaceful. It felt empty, too empty. He collected his singing bowl and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle, and looked back at Evelyn. He gave her the final warning, the words that would echo for the rest of her nights. Do not turn it. Do not stare into it. If you still see her after today, she's no longer lost. Evelyn didn't understand. What does that mean? The monk's eyes were filled with a terrible, calm pity. It means she is no longer wandering, confused, or knocking on a wall she doesn't understand. It means she has accepted your invitation. She knows exactly where she is, and she has chosen to stay. So, what do you think? Is the woman in 12A8 a vengeful spirit, or is she something else? An echo trapped in that lonely loop. This story is a classic example of a residual haunting, which is often interpreted differently across cultures. In many East and Southeast Asian spiritual beliefs, it's thought that powerful, unresolved emotions, especially profound loneliness or a deep attachment to a home, can anchor a person's energy to a physical place. The woman isn't necessarily angry, she's an imprint, a memory stuck on repeat, forever walking from kitchen to couch. She's not trying to scare the new family, she's just living her life, alone. The apartment itself has become a vessel for this tragedy, a warning that some things, and some people, never truly move on. The apartment isn't just haunted, it's occupied. What would you have done? Would you have tried to help her? Or would you have moved out? Let me know your theories in the comments below. This is just one of many tales from this apartment complex. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.